on, people.
All right, we are good. So we are here in the internet with Adam Mills, head coach, owner of Source Endurance, and the FoCo Fondo promoters, myself, Zach Allison, and Whitney Allison. And we wanted to work in Source Endurance to help everyone at FoCo Fondo have the best outcome. So, FoCo Fondo 2023, super hot day. We wanted to go through a bunch of things that are training related just so that everyone can have their best outcome. And, basically tips and tricks, like how you can get to the finish line with the most energy, the least amount of overheating, and the most time of giving yourself to drink the most beers at the end at New Belgium. So we'll jump into it. First topic is actually adapting to the heat. We've had a lot of athletes over the years that are like, I live in Georgia, it's hot. And it's like, yeah, we know the South is very hot. There are a lot of hot areas of the US, but it's a different thing from just living in a hot environment and sort of like feeling the sun on your skin versus actually having heat adaptation. So this is definitely where Adam Mills is an expert on cycling heat adaptation specifically. Check out Source Endurance. There's the Source Endurance blog and the science of results to figure out, if you want to read more on specific heat adaptation, but we'll go through as much as we can here. So Adam, tell us a little bit about heat adaptation and like frequency of heat events to adapt and sort of the best way to go about actually physiologically adapting to heat.
Yeah, so heat adaptation is it's an adaptation to an extreme environment, is probably the easiest way to put it. When you're adapted, you get a lot of performance benefits, and if you're racing, that really helps. Something like FoCo Fondo helps you go faster, get to the finish line, land on the podium, whatever. And if you're not racing, those same adaptations help you just enjoy the day a lot more. So that the first thing you're thinking is not, oh my God, it's so hot. It legitimately takes a long time. And I'm going to draw some parallels between heat adaptation and altitude because they're both kind of the same and that they're like, extreme environments. And FoCo Fondo does go to altitude too. So they, kind of similar way, but it takes roughly in literature right now, it's looking like every day helps. So even on day 2, it's better than day 1. So the old belief of like altitude, go the day before, absolutely not with heat stuff. Get into it as soon as you can. So day 2 helps a lot. Like day 7 to 10, there's a noticeable change, and like you start to notice that it's not as hot anymore. You're sweating a lot more, a lot quicker, and somewhere along the lines of like 3 to 5 weeks in, you start getting like a whole bunch of, blood value changes, which is what I would call like, true and complete and robust heat adaptation. So those are kind of your 3 steps.
So in that like length of time, like, 6 weeks of legitimate heat adaptation, time that you're giving yourself to train and adapt, like, do you find that inside of that like time period, is there like, can you have a hot ride and or a sauna training session like once a week, twice a week, or is there kind of in your research like a total number of heat events, or is there anything kind of that like allows people to plan for that?
Right. So heat adaptation it's a form of training, just like other training. And there's like a time and intensity aspect. So the limiter is when do you overheat? Because as soon as you overheat and start getting heat illness, then you've lost everything for that time period. So that really sets you back. So you have to play within those boundaries of safety, basically. And we're talking like, don't say, oh my God, it's so hot. Let's see how hot I can make it if you're in a sauna, right? And how long I can do it. But looking at like one hour, like at least one 1 hour session, 5 days a week for whatever amount of period that you're working towards. So that's kind of been the minimum standard. And that is that 1 hour session, you're looking at like core temperature elevating significantly. So that can be in a sauna hot enough to be like, yeah, that's pretty hot. And again, this is just broad strokes, right? And I'm not like fine tuning anything, to like doing a bike ride in the heat of the day, which can also help. but I wouldn't say a training ride where you're doing like set high intensity workloads. I would say more like a bike ride, just be out there, all the way to like sitting under in a hammock reading a book under a tree on a really hot, gross day in Georgia. That would also count. All the way to like being in a sauna, to like a hot tub. It's like hot water immersion, but like hot tub adventures also help too.
Yeah.
Something that's
So,
higher than your normal.
so if I'm understanding correctly, like if somebody has an office job where they have a lot of AC, it's not impossible for them to adapt to the heat. They can do some of those intentional things like incorporating the sauna. Maybe if they're riding inside in the morning before work, maybe not turn the fan on and some of those elements as well.
Right, that stuff helps. Even if it's a cool outdoor ride in the morning, like wearing more clothes than normal, has been shown to work. I don't like to tell people to do that because it's the middle of the summer and I'm not huge on wearing a long sleeve jersey unless I absolutely have to, or even jackets or whatever that is. I'm not personally a fan of that, but all that stuff helps. Also, as you become more fit, part of that being fit aspect is that so the amount of energy that you exert pedaling is roughly 20% of what you're going to use if you include the amount that you're dissipating as heat. So if you do a 200-watt ride, you're making 4-5 times more than that just dissipating heat. So the more fit you are, the more heat you're dissipating to make yourself go forward, so you'll get a little bit of an improvement that way. So just by standard normal training, doing your thing, you're going to have some heat adaptation, but there's not a whole lot of quantification there. We just suspect it right now is in literature, but it hasn't been quantified yet. It's pretty hard to set up an experiment for that one.
Yeah. So in general, get legit hot a couple times a week, as many weeks out from the event as you can without getting heat illness symptoms.
Right.
And then what actually in the event, again, FoCo Fondo 2023 being very hot, what are some of these are going to be obvious, but people didn't do them and things become less obvious when you're actually overheating also and your brain's literally boiling. But what are some things that people can do in the event if they start to feel, ideally you're mitigating as you feel hot, not when you already have symptoms of heat illness, but what are some things people can do in an event like FoCo Fondo or other long hot gravel events to sort of prevent getting too far into the heat illness category?
So we actually start with what the symptoms are of overheating, like a little short list of what some of those are.
Oh man, I had a whole list, but I've
most common.
Yeah, like feeling kind of loopy, like upset stomach. Like if you stop sweating, that's a really big deal. Immediately like find shade, but that's could be a false choice because if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no trees, you have to get to where there's water at some point, right? Yeah, so feeling loopy, like if you notice you can't concentrate, that's a good one. If you notice you haven't had to pee in a long time, that's an outside indicator as well too. So the number one, the first thing that happens when you start getting heat acclimated is you start sweating a lot more. So I guess everyone should know their sweat rate. It's pretty easy to figure out, like weigh yourself before and after, how much water you drank. If you had to pee during the ride, like take a guess, and then kind of do the math and figure the difference. And that's how much you sweated, and then divided by hours is like, liters per hour, right? Elite athletes, which a lot of, I think in literature, an elite athlete is effectively like someone on the front end of the front half of the finishers in any of these races, or can be qualified as like an elite athlete. They're usually sweating 1.5 liters or 1 liter an hour, which is a lot. Those big FoCo Fondo bottles are 1 liter, so that's how much they're sweating now. I don't think those are no longer available anymore, but for those big giant, you guys use, what do you use now? You have big giant bottles, both.
We have the first endurance ones are 1 liter, like 950 milliliters or something like that. Yeah.
Talking one of those an hour. So to like prevent heat illness, first thing I would tell people is when it's that hot, like don't skip an aid station. Drink all your water before you get there, and then stop and refill. I mean, if you're a elite athlete or you're a professional and you're racing, you know, I would expect the education level for all of them is much higher, and they're making choices and doing some trade-offs between when they can and can't stop, and support levels and whatever. So I'm gonna assume they know what they're doing a lot more than most people. But for the average person, if you're not racing, like just stop at every aid station and get water. Then takes, and a lot of times it's the fastest way to the finish line. Stopping for 1 minute here saves you 2.5 hours of riding 25% slower. So you've already made up that minute plus a lot more.
That's a
And I
huge
think
deal. And that's kind of last year, and a lot of the, not a lot, but some of the people that I talked to that had heat symptoms were skipping aid stations in an attempt to get a better result. And at the end of the day, it's going to yield a worse result not stopping. So you can go faster than what you would have done, even likely staying with that group that you left to stop at an aid station. You'll end up going faster every time without having heat symptoms.
Right.
And I think something else that's interesting to note here too, especially for people coming from more humid environments, is that our air is very dry. So like your sweat rate isn't necessarily as obvious as like just being covered in sweat and water all the time. So you still really have to drink a lot more than what you physically see.
Well, when you're in the Midwest or in the Southeast, like you're sweating because you dry off and you jump in the pool. That's how soaked you are, right? And you come to an arid environment like Fort Collins, and you're still sweating just as hard, but it doesn't feel like it because your clothes are still dry. But that's just sweat doing what it's supposed to do. You get the evaporative cooling, right? And so it does not surprise me that people that have not done like hard riding at that altitude or in that climate, they will have problems more often than they probably should. They may have all the education and lots of practice at home when they're when they're soaked in sweat, but as soon as they hit somewhere where they're not soaked, they're like, oh, I'm not sweating anymore. So yeah, that makes sense.
And just to add one more clarifying thing, like when we talk about a hot environment, like 2023 FoCo Fondo was one of the 5 hottest days of the year, but 2022 was 30 degrees cooler. So when we're talking about hot environments, generally, like how are those like split up?
I would say anything over like 75 degrees would be
Okay.
hot. And there's so that, but it will vary. Generally speaking, it will vary depending on like the wet bulb globe. So that's like humidity and heat combined. And there's a chart with that number, but roughly like 70 to 75 degrees will qualify as like a warm environment. The more humid it is. If it's less humid, you might be like 75 to 80 degrees to qualify, but that's not particularly hot. It's just for most of us who stay outside a lot, that's just a warm day. It's a nice day, but um, but it's technically, I would say that would be a warm environment. Yeah.
Some other on-course tips, just knowing the course, the 118 FoCo Fondo course from 2023 should be the same for 2024. It is an arid environment, but there are a lot of creeks and canals and like running water on course. One thing that I was kind of interested in hearing from, like whenever we're out on a training ride and we start to overheat and we know how far we are from water and how far you are from an aid station, we're going to jump into a canal. We don't really care that there's a cow pooping just next to the canal, but like you're going to die, right? So you're in a couple canyons, you're next to a couple creeks. The higher up you are, the colder the water is. Like if you're going to have to stop because you have heat symptoms and try and figure out what's going to happen to you, and you know how far it is to the aid station, and you're going to try and make it there in short bursts, get in a creek. Like look around. If you're in a canyon, canyons are caused by water. So like the odds of there being some sort of flowing water that you can douse yourself with if you're out of water, or even if you're mitigating intake and stuff like that, like look around for a creek to jump into, and just otherwise knowing exactly where those aid stations are. There's going to be a larger water stop at the top of the course that I think we had a guy out there with water kind of roaming around, but we'll release a tech guide ASAP with a lot more water stops and opportunities to to stop, you have to stop. I can tell you where the water is, but definitely make sure you stop there. And then if it gets dire and you're moving really slowly, then find a creek and jump in.
Right. And that's, I mean, some people will get a little bit grossed out like by that, but up in the mountains, it's pretty clean water relative to jumping in a creek in Kansas.
Yeah. And when you're not chugging it either, like you're
Right.
gonna,
Yeah, I would say
you can
don't
cool
drink
off
it.
and then, yeah, keep your mouth shut. um, yeah.
So what would be some other best practices if you start to notice that you're having some of those symptoms, just different opportunities,
If
shade, creeks?
so it's tricky because if you catch it early enough, then you don't have to stop, but you're looking at like your body's getting too hot, so you have to reduce workload by sitting in shade helps. Jumping in a creek will help you like dump that heat into the water, dissipate it somehow. If you catch it early and you know, like, okay, the aid station's soonish and I have some water, like, don't save it. Drink all the water right away because that water will only help you when you drink it and it will not help you sitting in a bottle or in a pack on your bike. Because I think I read in like a National Geographic like 20 years ago or something, like people that get found, their bodies get found in life rafts from shipwrecks or whatever, they almost always have water in their canteen because they rationed it, right? And it doesn't help you in the canteen. It's like just finish your water, you know. So I would say to do that too. And I've done it where you hit the aid station, you're like, great, I have half a bottle of water I was saving, and it's not helping me anymore. So that would be a good one. Don't dump it on yourself. Just because it doesn't help you then. Most of it just goes in the ground. You dump it on yourself. So drink it.
Or dump it on yourself in the aid station and then fill it up again. Like that's,
Right.
Alexi went through that of like, Alexi finished that long route in 5 and something hours, super quick. And like his practice was get to an aid station, fill a bottle, dump it on yourself, fill a bottle, chug as much as you're comfortable with, and then fill it again and then go. So the aid stations, none of them ran out of water. It's, a lot of my job is figuring out how to get thousands of gallons scattered all around the course. So yeah, you're not saving someone else by not dumping a bottle on yourself at an aid station too, but definitely utilize the aid stations to the best of your ability.
Right. But I would say don't dump it on yourself unless you need it. I
Right.
wouldn't make the aid station shower a practice for everybody.
Right. So this next topic is kind of tangential, but fueling. So like back to aid stations, there's aid stations at FoCo Fondo every 20 to 30 miles. There's some water stops on top of that. There's an oasis on top of that. Can you just chat briefly on like, some of the carbs per hour that we hear a lot of athletes talk about? It's obviously dependent on your size and your output. You've done FoCo Fondo a few times, so you can kind of talk to like your pacing for fueling and what a median size rider would sort of look at for like pacing by the climbs that are coming, pacing by the distance that they're doing and their size and things like that.
Right. So regarding fueling, I mean, the professionals strive for like 100 grams of carbs an hour. My caveat to that is if you're a professional and think that's a good number, like you can do it and you practiced it, right? So that's a number you train for. That's not a number that most average or a little bit above average athletes will do, but find your number, find your carb intake that you're doing and train for it. Also train in warm weather because if it's hot outside, like a gel of some sort tastes a lot different when it's 105 degrees and you're pulling out of your pocket than it does like when it's 70 degrees. In particular, those like the fruit flavored ones they taste different. uh, so practice it. Practice what you're trying to do. I'd say most athletes can probably get by on 40 to 60 grams an hour, which is still a fair amount. It's a lot more than was preached, 10 years ago. We were talking about, about that stuff. Also remember you can mix You can put drink mix in bottles too. Anytime you can put sport mix in a bottle, I would say do it. As long as you've had it before. I have a couple brands that I just can't drink because of the ratios in the mixture. And then I have some that I really like. So we should all be kind of like that. If you're wondering, like, what are the mixtures, what's the food, and you're super sensitive, just take your own. Like, put a bar bag on or put a frying bag on and take your own mix, take your own food if you're gonna be that sensitive towards it. Talking about like pacing for those climbs, like I remember the one on the one on the long ride it was a long time going uphill, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Am I thinking right?
Yeah, and it rolls uphill, but yeah, I mean, basically all the courses are kind of uphill out and rolling downhill back. So
Right. Well, and I say, like, someone like Alexi who won last year, like his uphill time is going to be way faster than mine for sure. But like as far as pacing goes, I would say start conservative on those long uphill drags. And everyone loves to think about like FTP as your magic number, but that's, unless you're training and trained for it, and FTP output is something you can only manage like 30 to 50 minutes in a day. So if you spend all that effort going up the hill, or you spend all that 50 minutes in the first half of the day getting to that climb, then you've already exhausted that whole energy ability, right? So I would say stay a little bit more conservative than that. And as you're going uphill, you're going higher in elevation, so all those numbers get skewed towards the harder end of the range. So what your threshold power is at sea level is not what it is at 8,000 feet. So don't treat them the same. That also means like maybe you have to swallow your pride a little bit and watch some friends right away. But if they don't stop at the A, you might catch them at the A station, but if they don't stop at the A station, you'll probably see them later that day.
in the canal. Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as pacing goes, you also have to, I guess, combine that with tactics and strategy. So if you're trying for the bolo tie, you should kind of know your time checks. Like aid station 1 is at no earlier or no later than whatever time, and so you have to make some decisions to stay on your timetable as well. And that may be it will probably be you're going to ride harder than you want to ride at some point during the day for some extended amount of time, but just understanding like this is where I have to make this group to stay on that timetable for the bolo tie. And you guys don't give a lot of them out to this day.
Yeah. We mess with the times as the course changes, but it is interesting. Like, we want it to be pretty competitive, but we do look at like median rider times and things like that to go into that. But so touch for a second, we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but like the packs versus bottles discussion. So like we have a lot, basically I feel like every athlete that I talk to, especially the ones that do FoCo Fondo, but most races that are, around 100 miles or over, or could be hot, you're talking about that liter an hour for a trained athlete to sweat through. That to me really, pushes that pack, the hydration pack over the bottles thing. If it's, 30 miles is the biggest gap between aid stations, and you have 2 1-liter bottles, then you're definitely at a lot of times at FoCo Fondo going to be pushing the hydration limit. So have you found like an actual pack versus bottles limit, where like a certain distance or heat or amount of climbing or something like that you recommend a pack over bottles? Do you have any rules on that, or is it athlete by athlete?
I think you and I talked a little bit about like support at events. So there's a lot of variables that go into it. One of which obviously is the early race scenarios. So a lot of these events will have, I would call it a race deciding split within the first 2.5 hours. So if you know that in the first hour there's a 10-minute climb that will decide the permanent splits of the day, then you may have to go without a pack, even though it's the right decision. If you to use one, like logistically, you have to make some decisions and decide, well, can you pick up that pack at aid station somewhere from some sort of help, or do you just maybe ride an empty pack so you don't have to carry an extra like 2 liters, half a gallon roughly up a climb where other people aren't. So that if you're racing, you have to for sure think about that. Otherwise, if you're talking about like heat and sweat rates and how hard you want to ride, I would say a pack is almost always a good idea. If you don't need it, you can always drop it at an aid station, assuming you can get it back.
Especially at FoCo Fondo, there's not like a, game ending climb where you're going to get popped out of the group in the first hour, where like by the time you get to a lot of the climbing, your pack might be mostly empty and it's not a detriment by weight.
Right. Yeah. If I were doing the long route at FoCo Fondo, I'd probably ride with the pack. Knowing that the faster groups will likely skip aid station 1. Some of them will probably skip aid station 2. I always say, like, I hope they don't skip aid station 2, but someone always does, right? So I think a pack would be a good idea, because you're right, you would be empty by the time, or make it a challenge, make that part of your game plan to make sure it's empty by the time you start going up those long extended climbs.
Yeah.
Because then you've already sweated that water out, or you've consumed it too, so it kind of helps you a lot more. But
Yeah.
And you can always do stuff too where, if you carry a pack, but you don't want to carry full bottles, you can always fill bottles up part way or something with the intention of filling them at an aid station if you decided you wanted to save some of that weight as well.
right.
And then just a reminder, like FoCo Fondo does not allow any outside aid, so it is definitely a part of the decision-making process for somebody going for a below tie time, or one of the podium spots is that they'll have to calculate out like pack and bottles and what type.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot of variables, and I think you also have to look at how frequent the aid stations are. So an event like Unbound has what, like 3 aid stations for 200 miles, and good luck otherwise. So on that one, that's why everyone has a pack, because you just need you're basically cameling to the next aid station. Whereas an event like FoCo Fondo is, 20 to 30 miles is every 2 hours at the most, right? Most people probably clear those gaps in an hour and a half between aid stations. So ideally, you don't need to have a pack for an event like that. But if it's hot, I would never say it's a bad idea. What do I tell people? I've never done a long hot day on a bike and said, man, I just had too much to drink today. I really wish I wouldn't have had that last bottle. Like, no one's ever said that.
Yeah. Well, cool. We've got a few minutes left. Last topic I wanted to chat with you about. You've had a lot of great insight over the years on like tire choice, for an event like FoCo Fondo, or really like the philosophy of choosing a tire for any gravel event or mixed terrain event. Can you talk a little bit about how you advise people on what tires to use, based on like what type of rider they are? Like if you have a limiting, skill ability, then you can run a bigger tire and go faster over the course, versus if you have, really strong skill component to your riding practice, then you can run a faster tire and likely go a little faster and not run into issues. How do you sort of advise people on tire choice?
I would say think about the part of the course that's the most challenging, that might give you the most problems, and then look at how long, we'll say duration wise, that is. So if it's a gnarly single track with super steep downhills and whatever, and it takes an hour, there's an hour and a half of it. So is that hour and a half going to matter in your race? And if the answer is yes, and you got to start choosing a tire for that. And there's a lot of different choices. I know, you guys, both of you have the luxury, we'll say, of being able to, unzip your basically showcase of tires and just choose whichever one out of the quiver is the right one for the day for you, which is great. And I would say people that do these events should have something similar on their own. that they've accumulated through numerous events and just pick the one that will minimize the amount of detriment that this like defining feature of the course is. FoCo Fondo starts typically on kind of mundane terrain where speed is the thing you need the most. And so if you're trying to pick a tire for that, I would say a fast tire with some sidewall block to help you turn like once it gets a little bit gnarly. But you know, if it rains, that calculus changes, or you know, if it's super windy, then that could change again. But so like maybe contact people who've done the race a few times if you're on the fence about something, or just throw the extra tires in your car on the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. This is super helpful. I would just say, you know, if any of this freaks you out, and it kind of should a little bit, then contact Source Endurance. If any of the sweat rate stuff and nutrition stuff is really, you have a lot more questions, contact Source. There's a ton of super experienced coaches and nutritionists involved in Source Endurance. They're also the official coaching partner of FoCo Fondo, so reach out to them with any questions or any coaching needs that you have. And then continue to just dive into the FoCo Fondo Riders Corner page. We've got a ton of, you know, direct knowledge on what is going to be at the aid stations, first endurance nutrition, things like that, what tires we would say you should run if you're this type of rider or that type of rider. So, you know, just reach out to the people that are here to help you have the best event day possible.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.